love, like happiness, as terms, as words, is so subjective, right? It's something so
Mhm.
personal to each individual. And so I would start there. Like, how does this company's employees, how do each one of them relate to this word love? It must relate, it must mean something to him or her or them. So I would start there. Because then that's when they can start being authentic to this. Like, because even some people, probably salespeople, are like, what the hell? I'm not selling love. I can't put a number on that. But then what does it mean to you? It's almost like method acting in a way.
Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Groundswell Origins Podcast, where I connect you to outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin. And we're going to talk today about happiness and meeting with the CEO and co-founder of Delivering Happiness. She used to work with the company called Zappos and has now launched her second book called Beyond Happiness: How Authentic Leaders Prioritize Purpose and People for Growth and Impact. Right up my alley with Groundswell. And we have a really fascinating conversation about how happiness is such a critical component for sustainable growth in a business. And we cover so much ground. She is just like well celebrated for being one of the first people to really, I think, bring a light to this in a way that makes happiness sort of like become one of the biggest topics around culture development. And I think this is going to be an episode you don't want to miss. So without further ado, let's paddle in. All right, here we are with another episode of the Groundswell Origins Podcast. And my elusive, but I can't wait to talk to you, Jenn Lim. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you. So good to be here. And thank you for being so patient because the elusive thing must be annoying as hell.
Oh, it's worth the wait. I know. I've been dying to get you on. I think we've been talking back and forth with your publicist for about 6 months. I think you and I met at Business Mastery,
Hmm.
if I'm mistaken, right? It was in Palm Beach in Business Mastery at Tony Robbins event, and I saw you on stage, and that really was exciting because I love the message that you were delivering around happiness and the impact of it. And today's topic, I think, is the strategic advantage of happiness, and you're an expert at it. Um, that's what brought us into you and I chatting, and you were so gracious to jumping on the show just with the conversation. So I thought if it'd be okay with you, maybe just start a little bit of a background. What led into this whole desire to really bring forward, innovation and happiness and your background in happiness?
Yeah, I would say the origination didn't come from the word itself, happiness, by any means. Like, I wasn't happy-go-lucky like growing up. If anything, I was the cynical existentialist, like reading books by Albert Camus and stuff like that. But fast forward to, gosh, I guess it was like 20-ish years ago. That's when books on positive psychology, like Marty Seligman, and Happiness as a Science came out. And so Tony and I started geeking out on that stuff because I was like, wow, this is fascinating because is that really answering these questions that existential of, like, why are we here? What does happiness mean? What is purpose? All these things. And it's so cool that people were already, reading about it, researching it, documenting it, but it wasn't being used, like practically yet. And so I think that's what started the whole crusade to like say, well, this all makes sense, but how do we actually make it, you know, into everyday work life, integrate it? And so I think that's what kind of got the passion going for how do you do this not just in life, but in company. And that's when using Zappos kind of as a petri dish of what would it mean to try and focus on employee happiness so that your customers will be happier naturally, and then you'll be, having more profits, more sustainable business, and the creation of more meaningful life with purpose, with values in place. So that was a huge chapter of testing that out and seeing how it worked at Zappos, and now with Delivering Happiness, doing it with organizations around the world.
That is really interesting. So, that experience that you had with Zappos, what were some of the experiments and what was some of the outcomes that led you to some insights that started the book and all the different things you're doing?
Yeah, there's some. It's so it's really fun to like go retro and think about those early days. But like things like paying people to quit. Um, so in the early days of recruiting, the people like people basically training are given an offer to get paid to quit, and that was to make sure if they feel like they're going to believe in the culture, are you going to believe in these values, are you going to believe in that there's a higher purpose than selling shoes. So that was one way. Test their
Okay, hold on. So you're paying people to quit.
Yeah,
Give me a little more context. Like, how long would they be with you before you made this offer, and why wouldn't people just like try to get hired to get paid to quit?
yeah, because so essentially training was about 8 weeks long.
Hmm.
um,
So 2 months.
Yeah, and then around the 4 to 5 week mark is when this offer to quit. So basically, the offer kept on going higher and higher because not enough people were taking it. It became like a self selection model because those that quit, and I think it started like a few $100 and then it went to like the first month salary, that kind of thing. Because what we found is that you're self-selecting, and the people that choose to stay on are then therefore that much more committed, that much more productive and engaged, and then much more aligned with the fact that yes, we are here to make money, but we're here also to live our values and have fun. So that was the experiment, and it saved money because in the end, we all know it takes at least from 1.5 to 3 times a person's salary to go through that whole effort again of realizing later that this person's not going to work. We have to fire, we have to rehire, we have to retrain, yada, yada, yada. So at the end of the day, it saves a company money, but not many, people think of it that way.
Interesting. So it's like almost like you're vetting out people that were bought into the culture, the vision of the company, and as opposed to just being a transaction. I'm coming here to get hired. Like you're really looking for somebody that sees this as, hey, it's not just about the money.
Hmm.
Is that did that turn out consistently? Like once these people didn't turn it down, there was a pretty significant shift from before you did this experiment,
Yeah, I think it was a next level up of committed people because
right?
especially one of the reasons why Zappos moved to Vegas was because it's hard. It used to be in San Francisco, and they decided they really wanted to focus on prioritizing customer service. So it's really hard to build a stable, body of people here in the Bay Area, knowing it's so expensive. So moving to a place like Nevada, where customer service was sort of like one of the more prestigious jobs, and you can buy a house and you can have a good school, that kind of thing. So moving it over there made it like much more well positioned to prioritize customer service in a meaningful way and keep the people, because high turnover and all that with the role like customer service. So there, 1 month pay is quite a bit of money. So for someone to say no to that, then you know that they're not just in it for the paycheck. Then you get
Right.
a sense like, oh yeah, they're actually in it for something more, which is really high for Zappos. Like purpose, having a sense of purpose, and living their values in an authentic way.
So what was some other experiments? That one's awesome.
That one was that one caught a lot of attention, and it worked. So that was cool. Another one. So one of the levers of happiness is, and so there's a few of them. And one of them is called the lever of progress. The other ones are a sense of autonomy and control, sense of connectedness, meaningful connections, and sense of purpose. So those are a few levers. So one of them being progress. What the merchandising department did was essentially, instead of going say, hey, you have 2 years to get in from this entry level job to becoming a merchandiser, which is a pretty big deal at a company like Zappos. So instead of doing that, they said, hey, let's celebrate these milestones every few months. This is what you've done, congratulations, and this is what you have to go. And just by doing that alone, there was no pay raises, all that stuff. It was just that sense of progress. Happiness levels increased in that department just because they knew they were getting somewhere quicker than they would have otherwise. So I think a lot of these things is like interesting because it's really relevant, especially right now. You know, sense of progress that got stunted for a few years. Sense of control, we all lost it for a few years. So it's interesting what was working back then can everyone wants to be happy in one way or another. So it's interesting how it can
It's almost amplified now. There's just such a different level of sensitivity. You know, that the three levers you said, there was progress,
yeah, sense
what was
of
the other ones?
progress is one. Another one is sense of control or autonomy.
Sense of
So,
control. Yep.
I can make my own decisions. I'm trusted, that kind of thing. Sense of connectedness. So a
Hmm.
meaningful connection beyond happy hour drinks, beyond Red Bull, that kind of thing. And then the most ultimate sustainable form of happiness is purpose. What
Hmm.
are you doing that's bigger than yourself? And I think, like as you're alluding to, now more than ever, people, great resignation, quiet quitting, all these different forms that will continue these trends, but coming down to, hey, what is my purpose? Why am I spending all these precious hours doing something I really don't like, or the people with people I don't really want to be around?
A lot of people that hear this happiness, they're going, well, of course, like, I want my employees to be happy. They kind of shrug.
Mm.
Is it like, is this something that needs to be intentionally designed, built, and can it be manufactured? Meaning, I'm a business going, okay, we need to just implement the happiness strategy and it works. Or is it much more meaning than that? From the top down, there's like the level of empathy or something that has to change in order for this to occur. Give me a sense of the spectrum, because you could just show up and talk, go, hey, make sure your people are happy, and people can go, okay. But I think you're talking about something much more meaningful based on what you showed me at that event. But can you share with us a little bit of what you're thinking?
Yeah, so it's definitely not a flip of a switch. It's like not like, hey, our company wants to be happier, and this is how you do it, X, Y, and Z. It is. There's a lot of layers to it, and I'm glad you bring it up because the perception of happiness, and so, this is something that we've been trying to course correct for as long as we've been around since 2010, is that it's not rainbows and unicorns, and this goes back to the days of Aristotle. Fast forward to positive psychology, all this in between, all this work that's been done has shown that it really is about having that meaning, that sense of purpose, sense of meaning, sense of authenticity, a sense of self. And so, how do we translate that today's terms is what we're working on now. And what's interesting is, yeah, there are leaders that want this for their company, but they see it as, checking it off as a box of things to do, like culture, check, like brand, check. And that's not how it works if you want it to be meaningful, because the leaders that actually recognize it within themselves, like, oh shit, like I hope it's okay to, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, I swear. I fucking swear all the
Okay, awesome.
time.
I was like, no, I didn't want to assume. It's like you want to do this shit not only just because it's good for the company and you want to make more money and you heard it's like like the end thing. It's like you're putting the mirror to yourself as a leader and say, oh, I am realizing my sense of happiness is hinging on all these other people that are in my teams, that are my vendors, that are my suppliers and partners. And that's the biggest meaning and impact that companies can have when there is a recognition that, oh, it's freaking starts from myself. Then there's actually like more intentional reasons why to do this, and then it truly becomes a triple win in terms of the profits and the sense that you have more productive and happy people, and you're serving people around you, not just your customers but everyone you touch in your ecosystem. And the world's so small now, and I mean, I know you know a lot about this and wanting to serve, right? Like, how do you actually put that into place so that you are nurturing yourself, nurturing your team and your company, and serving others all at the same time? Which we now know it doesn't have to be this zero sum game. It can be very much a positive sum game now.
Is there a level of happiness? Like, I think of, is like, if I'm a company, it doesn't really. It's not like they're commodities. They're building something that there is no purpose. Like, the business is about, the purpose is making profit. Does it's like, how are you able to define purpose and achieve a level of happiness with your culture, even if you're selling, widgets?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why, like when this happened 15, 20 years ago, Zappos and culture wasn't in buzzword word yet. Purpose wasn't in everyday meetings. or in the boardroom. But what they showed is like, we just don't want to be known for selling shoes. Like, that's how do we get people inspired by saying selling shoes? And some people love them, some people don't. And so I think that's case in point. And that was a long time ago. So fast forward today, when you see those purposeful companies like Airbnb, like I don't even remember, this was like a few years ago, BC before COVID, they had these Super Bowl ads, and it just said, I think it was like like a landscape, beautiful sunset kind of thing, and all it said was, belong or something, we belong, something to that effect of their purpose at the time. But they
Mhm.
had no, like they didn't share at all what they do. And that as an example, Tom shoes as another example of this is another shoe example, but it's not about the widget. It's they grew pretty amazing brands in relative short amount of time because they were so purpose driven.
Yeah, well, Tom's, they were giving away shoes to people that needed shoes when you purchased shoes. So it had like a intrinsic purpose and the business model.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, Tom's they came up with that, so that was good on them. One for one.
So what if you don't have that? Like you're not you can 'cause I think of it as, are you a business of impact? You're impacting the world, or do you a business that does impact? So like maybe you donate, money to a certain charity or something, or you're impacting internally. Like I don't know, is there like a level of what you would expect happiness to be in a company to get the full ROI that you're talking about?
I think there are levels. I mean, I think there can be those that are scratching the surface and those that are really all in. Another company that has proven that they're really all in is like Patagonia. They're one
Mhm.
of the original OG people in this whole purpose game. And the CEO recently announced a few months ago that he's donating all profits to, they don't have the one for one model, but what do they care about? The earth. And it's very simple. They're donating everything back to that.
Mhm.
So it doesn't have to have a model per se, but it has to be super clear to your customers, to your employees. Like, what do you stand for? And now what we've seen happen with social unrest, Black Lives Matter, um, political stands, like where people on abortion, all that stuff. Like more and more companies are wanting to step up and be able to say, this is where we stand.
On that stand thing, I have like sort of mixed reaction to it because truly there are businesses that are stepping into it and stepping up, but a lot of them are sometimes joining the bandwagon, and it sort of dissipates to the flavor of the day, thinking that's going to either it's like almost like not greenwashing, but like purpose washing or something. I don't know if that's even a word, but you know what I mean. Like, and I kind of like I'm always I guess I have like and I'm in the space of like helping businesses connect with their brand and their purpose and build a groundswell and audience. Like I'm in total agreement, but I do wonder if people look at it as, is it just like you said, checking the box, a thing to do?
Hmm.
What changes? Like when you can see a meaningful change from an employee to a consumer to a stakeholder to a partner to an observer, when someone's really leaning into that purpose, like Patagonia is living it.
Hmm.
Like that's for sure. But there's so many businesses that are either not marketed, you don't know that they're actually living great purpose. They got happy clients, happy staff. They're just like beaming.
Hmm.
And then there's other ones that are faking it. How does someone actually discern the happiness? Like, is it just like attrition, like employees and customers, or what would be your metric? How do you measure happiness? I guess that's what I'm saying.
Oh, that's a different question.
Yeah, maybe I'm kind of muddling it together. It's just so much around this, right?
There's a lot of layers. And so I guess to take the measurement piece separate from how do you separate those that are using it for PR points versus really living it. So the measurement part, I think what's cool about this is that because there's been more research being done. And so like we talked about it, what we now know increases happiness are things like autonomy, control, progress, connectedness, and purpose. Like, so now we can actually bring that into the workplaces and measure accordingly to what sentiment is. So both qualitative and quantitatively measure against these things. Like, how well do you get along with your immediate manager? How well along do you get with your peers? How much do you feel aligned with the purpose? How much do you feel aligned with your own purpose? So these questions are now we're able to capture from a data perspective. And the biggest thing about this, and this pretty much applies to any kind of benchmarking and measurement, is like you can compare all you want to any company around the world, but the most important comparison is really within your own company first.
Mm-hmm.
That's the measurement of progress, because it's kind of like set point of an individual's happiness. I might not be most happy-go-lucky, and I might not be the most low depressed person in the world, but I have my own set point, and everyone does. We have our DNA, what we were born with. We have our environment, what we need to make decisions on, and then we have our choice. Environment of like things that external, and then internal to our choice. So I think that's the biggest thing with measurement. What matters most, and measure that. So for a long time, it's about retention. Burnout is big right now. Productivity, engagement, all these things are still very important, especially in this really rough ride we're still having with this looming recession we've been talking about forever. But what does that actually mean, and how does it matter to your company? So that's why I say measure what matters most. And now's the time to ask ourselves again, what does matter most as a leader?
So I declare, yes, I'm going to go after happiness. I'm going to do everything you said. How do you implement it? Like, I guess you gave a couple of small examples, like, in terms of the employees, like giving the levers, but how long could someone expect to really, because it's, I think of like, sometimes I've worked in the past, like we'll do a mission and vision and it's everyone at the boardroom table is all bought in. It's great.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes on the wall, but it doesn't really translate down to implement down in the warehouse and like how do you see, because Zappos did such a good job of
Mm-hmm.
that permeating it consistently at every level of job as I understand it,
Yeah,
and how do you implement that?
totally. So one of the $1 million questions we've had for the last 13 years, right? Like, but what did Zappos do, and how can we do it? Yeah, and the thing is, you can't recreate your own Zappos within your own company. You got to do it with your own DNA. Number one, like when you have your mission statement, when you have your purpose statement, when you have your values, you got to make sure that it represents your true DNA. And that's the work that is so important, because it's not just who just happens to be there at that time, or who's the loudest, most uh, extroverted voice when it comes to culture. It's like get real with why they started the company in the first place. Capture that in purpose and values. And this is a big one that you haven't mentioned is behaviors. So when you ask how you live it, one thing is codifying it. The next is actually making sure everyone lives it by having very black and white behaviors, defining each of those values. Like, what does it mean to be a good communicator? What does it mean to have integrity? Like, that one is probably the greatest word we've ever had. Like, Enron had that. And look what happened to them, that kind of thing. So, when you define these behaviors, then there's no discussion. It's black and white as to whether or not this person lived by this behavior, therefore value. And so the living comes in, documenting and codifying it. And then the most important thing after that is rewarding, recognizing, and incentivizing by it. So you're being measured for not just your skills and your performance as a rock star salesperson or project manager. You're actually being evaluated for your culture fit, your culture contribution. If you're doing your job, the how is being aligned with the values. So if that's all in place, then they're not just meaningless words on the wall anymore, because they're actually being lived and storified. People are talking about, hey, so and so did a kick-ass job because she was living this value, and it becomes part of the lexicon. It sounds hokey. I can understand that, but it is really cool when you can create a culture where people are speaking the same, so to speak, language and connect with it and feel like they're actually making more meaningful connections, therefore more productive and engaged and want to be part of that company.
I can see that working really well in a bubble that's everyone's consistently bought into that process.
Mm-hmm.
And then it doesn't when one or two people are kind of like, that's hokey. And it's like, so like the bad apple, right?
Yeah.
Is how do you identify and prevent that from it works until it doesn't? Like I look at the Tony Robbins bubble. I'm in there. It's like, it's incredible because everybody's at high vibe and it's like so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you try to replicate that outside of that bubble, and it's one or two people that don't have that same understanding of that language and stuff. It just
Mhm.
you can see how quickly it tamps it down.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, the Tony Robbins community has its own culture, and it's impossible to pretend or assume anyone outside of it understands it or wants to be a part of it. So that's why having it within a company or like an organization, you know, like if it's like a for-profit, nonprofit, whatever it is, having more of this um
It's almost like being part of a crew. Like you're kind of like,
like
I think you know what I mean. Like what you're describing is like when you get to that point where you're like, you're either in or you're not, and if you're in, you don't want to mess with it.
right, well, not in an asshole kind of way either, because it's kind of
Yeah, no, but I mean, like don't wreck our vibe, man.
yeah, and that sorts of thing. That's where self-selection, you know, and that's why paying people to quit was great. Like that was such
Hmm.
a unique idea, but the same thing can happen now. Like when you do have those bad apples, and these people might be hard to, you know, fire or transition off to a different role or a different company, but when you have the codification of saying, hey, you actually violated core value 2, 4, 8 in this way, like consecutively over the last 3 months, I'm sorry, this is the time that we need to part. You know, more
Right.
power to you. We wish you best, you know, that kind of thing. But it's not to a certain point. It's not a personal dagger, you know. It's kind of like, well, this is our
Yeah.
values, and you weren't living by them.
Yeah, and they're probably happier in the end. A lot of times when people are not living up to certain values, it's just it's not in them. And anyways, so I think maybe initially there's probably a reaction, but long term they're probably happy because it's just not congruent with themselves.
Yeah.
So at least I find when people are all congruent, it's easier to implement. One of the things that I do is in brand strategy is go, how do we implement the brand
Mhm,
across multiple domains so that the touch point of the customer, the stakeholder from a social post, how do you actually make it so everyone can understand it? And what I've been using is brand mantra.
mhm,
What's the feeling you want people to have
mhm,
at any point that and it's something you can communicate from the receptionist going, well, did you make this person, let's say it's welcoming as your brand mantra, did you make them feel welcomed at the service desk? Did you make them feel welcomed? Like it's easier to implement the brand strategy when you kind of bring it down to a feeling.
yeah.
Is there like a hack or some sort of thing like that you've done with happiness in this way
Uh,
to kind of just communicate it?
hack kind of thing.
Because the values, if you have like 12 values or whatever, right? Is there like a general statement that you can go, that kind of embodies it?
I think what we've learned along the way is that the simpler the better. And having 12 values just is not simple anymore. Having 10 values is not simple. Having like 4 to 3 to 5 is simple. And so
Mm,
having it in a way, as an example, like what you're sharing is great because you're rooting it in something that's a universal language of feeling. Like everyone knows how to feel. And so, as an example, with the hospital consortium out in upstate New York, Northwell Health, if you're familiar with that area, they've done amazing work because they have like 300 executives. They had this laundry list of values. They did the work and realized, hey, if we want to do better for our patients, we need to take care of employees. Let's revisit our values. And so they got everyone aligned to distill those into 4 values, and the acronym was CARE, like a culture of care. And they basically rolled that out to the custodian, to the the person that valets the cars, to the doctors and nurses, you know, everyone and everyone in between. So in the end, everyone got it. And they also implemented the biggest thing that I was talking about earlier, accountability for their actions through incentives. Because they knew if they weren't going to live by, it's not just like, oh, people's going to give you cold shoulder or think you're an asshole. It's more like, no, you're not going to, either you're going to get fired or you're not getting a raise, you're not getting a promotion. So they know that it's hand in hand, right? You can go touchy feely and do all these things for till kingdom come, but if it's not associated with their livelihood, with really their purpose of caring for the people, taking care of the people they love, it's going to break. So
mhm.
having sympathy and empathy of their understanding of their purpose, tie it in with the company's purpose, that's when you have what I'm calling the new social contract of, hey, we're in this together because we're going to get each other's backs.
I like that. And then, and when I'm reading your work and seeing some of the stuff that you've written, I kind of look at, the old thinking was the two levers for business, like to Peter Drucker, innovation and marketing. And I always thought that was flawed. Culture needed to be there, and I think that that worked when it was top down. But now that it's so different, and I think culture is that third. Those are the three for success in a lot in my mind. And one of the ways that comes up for me is you have a brand. You want to have your customers happy. You want to live to this purpose that you're trying to communicate to the world.
Mhm.
It takes every single person to live that. You go to a coffee shop like Starbucks, and if they're miserable, they're not living to the brand. That is the brand impression.
Mhm.
That's it. It's like actually your coffee could have been delivered great, like the quality of the coffee, the sugar, hot, all those things on time. But if it's delivered without a smile or with an energy or something, that is part of your brand. And I think that's what is now, I think, what's elusive and very challenging. I think that the area of expertise you have in helping people really help achieve employee happiness, their happiness permeates into your customers' happiness.
Totally.
What is sort of your sort of like, how do you tell CEOs to really understand this isn't a small impact? This is like the impact, especially now in a very different climate, quiet quitting and all this stuff. And what was it? Rage. I was reading a thing you did in Time Magazine about rage. What's it called? Rage. Like they're applying for jobs because they're upset, and they'll just go
Yeah,
apply at a bunch of different jobs. Like
rage apply.
that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's one of those like how many freaking trends have you heard since the Great Resignation, rage applying, quiet quitting? Now there's quiet promotions, which is actually sounds positive, but is a negative thing because people are asked to do more things without getting paid for it. So
Mhm.
the list goes on. And I think, yeah, if you're asking how I can talk to CEOs for them to understand, like there's there's a lot of different kind of CEOs out there, and then one of them just like really concerned about CEOs and CFOs about the bottom line, and totally warranted because I mean, full belief is that if you don't have profits, there's really a hard purpose. It's hard to talk about a purpose because you don't have a company to sustain it. So it's not like
Totally.
the profits is a given, like it's a default. It's table stakes. You don't have that, and you can't talk about all this other stuff. But us as human beings, if you want to talk about Maslow's hierarchy and all these things about elevating and getting to, um, you know, different stages of our own personal growth. So then you do talk about that. So if table stakes is profit, then we can talk about, look, last 15 years for those companies that double down on their people, they outperformed. And we saw this through Glassdoor. We saw this through Forbes Best Places to Work, Best Companies to Work for, Unfortunate. Those companies that double down on their people actually outperform the S&P 500 like 10 to 15 years in a row in economically bad times. So that's data for us to try and chew on and say, okay, that makes sense, right? Like if we think about what's happening now, all these layoffs, is that the wisest choice? Because yes, maybe you might be reducing costs and expenses really quickly, but what is that causing the other people that are left? What's causing maybe the people that you're firing or laying off that actually have skills that could be repurposed in very, very, very intentional and productive ways. So I think all these factors need to be considered, and a good CEO can consider that too. That it is not only just about that ROI anymore. It's also about, we call this the double ROI, and it's return of investment and ripple of impact on the other side.
That's what I was going to ask you about. I knew that was I was going to because that one when you put that on the board. Let's talk about was it ripple on impact,
Ripple of impact.
the double ROI. Can you just kind of break this down a little bit? Because that's actually one of the first things that caught my attention. Because it groundswell and it's ocean. I'm like, what? This is the kind of language I use. I love it. So mine's actually return on impact is what I call it for my business one. Building a community and building a groundswell and creating exponential growth. So when I heard that, I'm like, ooh, ripple on investment. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
please break this down for us because this is really, I think, the secret of the growing impact, like the growing and exponential impact of happiness within your culture.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So it's cool that you have your own. I'm curious to hear how you expand upon it too, because I know your book's about to come out. So it's like all these things I feel like are converging into bigger ways of that ripple of impact that we're doing. Because so as I
Well,
said,
I can. You want me to tell you mine? I can tell you mine if you want.
yeah, go for it.
Okay. So return on impact is based on the three stages of I kind of basically I think of building a groundswell, building a momentum, building exponential growth. It's around sustainable growth marketing.
Mhm.
Is got four stages: build, give, grow, transform. And it's really born from Don Peppers and Martha Rogers. If you probably know them from one-to-one marketing, is they came up with get, grow, keep. Those have been classic ways that we identify how do we grow a business, right?
Mhm.
How do we get customers? How do we grow customers and keep them? And I've used that model and I changed it a bit because a lot of people come to me and go, well, I need to get customers. And what I realized was there was not enough energy and time thinking and prioritizing the build is the first. And most people want to go and get customers like, whoa, whoa, it's like the bowstring. Let's pull it back. It feels weird. We're going the opposite direction, but that's taking the time to get our purpose, our alignment, our values,
Mhm.
because then we can move forward faster. It's like a storm, a groundswell that's moving in the same direction with consistent wind going in the same direction. It's got more energy and it's going to move faster and harder. So that's the first thing.
Mhm.
Two is shifting from let's change the energy and the thinking around what are we getting, like getting customers. How what are we giving? What are we giving the world? What's our give in terms of like freemium models? Like that's a classic growth hack of Sean Ellis from how he built Dropbox, right? Like and now the freemium model is like out there. But that's not about giving away something free. It's like what's your give? It's the energy of what are we giving the world? I think that there's a shift in strategy. You got to compete against your best competitor that's willing to give glasses to someone who needs them with every pair of shoes, like Tom's.
Mhm.
Then the next is grow. And everybody always goes, how do I get more customers? And this is where I'm fascinated with your work because really I believe growth is go deeper. It's deeper with your employees and happiness within your customers in a way that actually creates more exponential growth. And it goes into the last phase, which is transform. It's three phases. And it's based on Tony Robbins, to be honest with you. He modeled it. If you look at move, it's like movement. I'm moving products. Black Lives Matter. It's a movement,
Mhm.
but it didn't want to just be a movement. It was about creating change. That's the next stage, and it's not really about even creating change. It's about transforming the world.
Mhm.
And if you think of what we do in businesses, many businesses stay in the just moving products, but you could go to the next level where a brand can live and it can change from, like, say, a PC buyer to a Mac buyer.
Mhm.
Or if I listen to Tony Robbins' comment, it moved me, which is, life's happening for me. That's internal. But I read his book, it changed me. I was word of mouth. So when you start changing behavior, that's where word of mouth lives and starts creating some level of sustainability. But there's a third level.
Mhm.
And this is where I think you and my work converge, is transform. And think of that in employee stage the same way. When I went to a Tony Robbins event, I would tell everyone that I could listen. I'm like, I was a crazy person. I was compelled.
Mhm.
And when I heard the story about Tony, when he knew he had $1 billion business, when he was sitting and hearing about some lady ordering pizza from a Zappos customer service person, I'm like, there it is.
Mhm.
The employees were transformed to do exactly what was right in that moment. And that moment of transformation, people are compelled to tell other people.
Mhm.
And that's what I've been studying is going, how does someone market and build a business that grows exponentially with less energy over time?
Mhm.
And I think it's culture, innovation, and marketing. I haven't done a deep dive in culture, but I believe that move, change, transform model in my book applies to culture as well. So my
Totally.
return on impact is that
Mhm.
it's like, what is your return for every new customer you bring in? Are we able to turn that customer into actually being our advocate? Them turning into a customer. If you move your energy in marketing and branding on going, let's be obsessed over how can we compel somebody to bring someone else in, that'll bring you to some pretty exciting places in your brand design and your culture and your innovation.
Mhm.
That's our return on impact.
Mm. Love it. There's definitely a lot of interconnecting themes there. I think what I would do to add to build to that, like now that you've shared all that, which is beautiful, I think the focus that we've been on is on the employee side and culture. And so for the ripple of impact, in order to get these like level up stages that you're talking about, it's always been the belief. So if you can imagine, so ripple, right? You imagine throwing a stone in the sea, that kind of thing. So you see these ripples going out. And so the very inner ripple is the me. The next ripple out is the we. And then next is the community. and now extend. And community includes customers, partners, vendors, and everyone in your ecosystem. And now I've extended to society and the planet. So just imagining these concentric circles, and sort of within what you shared with your model, and one of the questions about culture is like, how do you make this all work? And to me, it's not that they're dependent on the other, because they're all interconnected and coexisting. So,
Ecosystem.
in like a system, exactly. So why we say start with the me is that that's, why does a customer start talking about, why did you start talking about Tony Robbins? Why does a customer of Zappos start saying, oh my God, I just got free ground shipping and blah, 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 it's because that interaction was so positive that they don't get it in everyday life, that they just can't help themselves. And so when someone's talking to a customer service rep at Zappos or whatever, that's that human connection that they have been lacking elsewhere. And so that's why starting with the me is so empowering. It's like you want every single person in your organization, including the leader, of course, living it authentically, because they're living their true self. And it doesn't have to be like you're zany or, like you're into this weird stuff. It's more just like you're being you. And people now, even more than 2020, they're, they are just starving for just real talk with real people. So this is a prime time opportunity. So when you have the ripple of impact, that person is living authentically, being themselves, living with their accordance to their own personal purpose and values, their own set of behaviors, and being a meaningfully sustainable, happy person, not superficially, intrinsically. And then you move that same thing, same model to the we, so that you have purpose aligned, values aligned teams, and therefore company, all aligned, with the same purpose and values. And then you're starting to operate as a single organism, even though you're multiple different, like the birds in the flock thing. Everyone's flying in the same direction, but any leader, any bird at any time can take the lead, because we know we're going in the same direction. Then that ripples out to your community of customers, partners, and vendors. And now, because we're so much more open and articulate about having a higher purpose than selling a widget, that connects direct impact to Patagonia's earth, Tom's shoes for someone in need. So that in the person's mind is not a customer that has to have it. It's every person in this ecosystem, starting with the employee in our model, because that's where you want them to be authentic first, and that's where the ripple happens to your teams, to your company, organization, and really how you're impacting the world. So that one of the best things I heard about someone we worked with at Starbucks, VP, he's like, you know what I love about this? I don't have to wake up and go check my phone and see what's on the news, what's the next headline. I can wake up and know with confidence I'm spending my day. And for him, it was social impact and climate change, because that's what his team was working on. And
Mhm.
how, that's happiness to him. Like he's like, I don't have to worry about this extraneous stuff, because I can take care of my kids, I can love my wife, and be a happy person, because all this other stuff really doesn't matter, because I know I'm making an impact to the world. And so this whole thing of like, how do we change the world, doesn't have to be so out of our hands anymore, or seem like so yeah, not feasible. It's like within our control now of having our own impact and rippling out.
I love the ripple. Yeah, I mean that it's to me that's I think a lot of people they just don't know where to begin,
Yeah.
or it's they intrinsically know that they want to create happiness in their organization, and they think it's like an afterthought. And I think that's where you and I kind of converge on this really exciting actually is I think there's a way to map this towards, like you're saying, there's an ROI on it. But there's an ROI in terms of immediate sales, immediate marketing, and less attrition for your clients, or better conversions, or converting people to a different level.
Yeah.
Like the stuff you're talking about with Zappos, it's like that person was they're happy when you think, have you ever seen an employee that just like they have joy when they like made you smile?
Hmm.
They genuinely like they really enjoyed that, and you felt it, that exchange. I think people have more fulfillment when they're actually delivering. That's why I liked that one book you guys, delivering happiness. Just it was so pointed, just saying delivering happiness. And my question for you is this: is that word? delivering happiness and you're talking about prioritizing people for growth and impact. I have a client. He's a dealer, not a dealer like a drug store, like a car dealership, multiple car dealerships, and he's got a really cool vision. He wants to. And we're talking to him. I'm like, I love how brave he is when we've got to go through this branding process. He goes, "We're not selling cars. We're selling love." And I was like, "Am I?" And I'm like, "I love it," but I'm also like, "But you want to help me brand this?" And I'm like, normally I have to push people there,
Mhm.
and we get somewhere not close to it. Not a client going, "I'm already here." And I was talking about changing the culture, and we basically landed on the number one priority isn't marketing, it was culture, and he's looking to identify a chief heart officer who's going to embody how we actually show that what we're selling, what we're serving, what we're delivering is compassion and love.
Mm.
The cars are just like part of the transaction.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I love where he's going with this, and I'm curious
Hmm.
what your response is when you hear that,
Yeah.
and if you were like, I think this would be a great example of like you would probably consult to a company like that to help them architect that. Am I right?
Yeah, I'm smiling because like, dude, this person's right up our alley. Like, he gets it. I mean, that's where we would love, not to overuse that word, but we would love everyone to get to that place of realizing not your mission statement or purpose statement has to be affiliated with your operations and like what your company's doing. It's something bigger than that. So, what I would say is that, and the biggest thing about this now is like that's seems like something very unattainable. Like how do you
I know somebody's listening is going, what? This is so janky. You're not selling love.
yeah,
Like, go back to your marketing. But I'm like, no, there's something here.
yes,
This is what I think that it's sort of this. I call it the unseen wave of business growth. This is it.
yeah.
This is this unseen thing that's it's not tactile, right?
Yeah. I would start with, okay, because I already shared the ripple impact and where it starts. It starts with me. Like love, like happiness as terms, as words, is so subjective. Right? It's something so
Mhm.
personal to each individual. And so I would start there. Like, how does this company's employees, how do each one of them relate to this word love? It must relate, it must mean something to him or her or them. So I would start there. Because then that's when they can start being authentic to this. Like, because even some people, probably salespeople, are like, what the hell? I'm not selling love. I can't put a number on that. But then what does it mean to you? It's almost like method acting in a way. It's like,
Mhm.
it's,
Well, it's funny you'd say that because that's what if you look at the work from Joe Pine and Gilmore, experience economy, which is every business is a stage.
yeah,
Like you can stage love, like in or like you're staging an experience,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And and so it's kind of this intertwined with that's
it is.
where it's not that you're staging it fake. It's like you're actually you're creating the environment or the journey in which these cues can make someone feel the feeling of like, hey, this is a you care about me. This is my form of love. And I think of the archetype in his brand archetype,
Mhm.
his primary is lover. So like Chanel bags, right? Like passion for sharing love of things and beauty and stuff. That's one of the main archetypes. So
Fully.
you're right. It can just be the love for cars. I don't know. I mean, I'm still trying to figure this out actually.
Start there. But that's the thing. It doesn't have to be, because it's such a universal word. But the biggest thing is like being able to help individuals first, namely employees, I think, how they want to relate to that term in their own
Mhm.
personal way. Then that's when they're gravitating and aligning with the higher purpose, because they're walking into that showroom or walking into work with their own sense of what love is, and they're bringing that to the table.
Interesting. How do you help them articulate it, or do you have a
Mhm.
conversation about it to go? Do you have like a round table, like what's love to you, and like what is it like? How do you actually facilitate that?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we do workshops. We call ourselves coach consultants for a reason. Like we're not consultants to tell you what to do. We're coaches as well, because
Hmm.
it has to be a co-process of asking questions and synthesizing them. So same thing we would do with brand of love, we would do with values. Like if there's a company of 5 values, we take 10 people of a 10 people team, say, what are your own values? Number one, let's not even talk about the company values.
Hmm.
If we want them to align to them, they have to define them for themselves. Same thing with purpose. What's your purpose? Not even at work. in your life. And so that's where we start. And then I think for this particular company, then it's being able to ripple that out to their customers, right? And how they perceive love and associate that with the brand. And then this is a big one too. We tend to forget everyone in our ecosystem. How important are the suppliers and vendors in all this too? Bring them into the
Couldn't agree more.
conversation.
Who's ever talking about the congruency of your suppliers?
Yeah,
Like,
these
that is such a bigger deal than people realize.
stakeholders are huge in the equation. You show them a little love and they'll like take it like 10x because they never get love, right? People are always thinking there's a part of the chain, but anyway, there's so many ways you can apply that across everything we touch, everyone we touch in our ecosystem.
So if you're asking them what's your values, what's your meaning of love, and then how do you harmonize that with, like, this is our vision of love. How do you how do you help them sort of like see this is how we're delivering love, if you use that as an example?
Well, I think as coach consultants or facilitators, and however we want to use those words, like as part of our why we get paid is to help synthesize a lot of information as to like we all have this individual notion and we're going to input this in, and then what does this all mean? Is like that's part of the synthesis, and you can do it from the data, like taking surveys and all that. But there's also the qualitative side too. Like these are the themes that we're pulling out here. And again, let's just do this independent of like what the company's purpose or values are. And these are the
Mhm.
themes of, hey, did you realize that 80% or 70% of this team here are aligned on these values? And it's kind of like, oh, I had no idea. And then did you realize that these purpose statements right here, these are the overlapping, sort of points of why this purpose is meaningful to them. And this is, mind you, after sharing their own personal stories, their own purpose, so really putting themselves out there. I mean, you can't do this work by being like, the Great Wall of China. You gotta have to like show some vulnerability, um, and then you show as that consultant facilitator how there is, wow, we actually are more similar than we differ. We actually have more things united than we should fight against. Sorry.
Mhm.
And then the correlation or the alignment happens with the greater. You'd be shocked how much alignment there is to begin with. It's just not unearthed yet or articulated or felt, because this stuff is experiential. You just can't write it and send it in and say we're done for the day. Um, Back to your stuff about feelings, that's where this comes in.
It's funny. That's actually something similar that when I've done brand design with staff, like we included the employees in it, it's a little bit like that. Like, actually, what's the truth to you? Like, what's the truth? The truth is
Mhm.
our customers like this. The truth is we believe this, whatever. And then you take the values that they have and you're going, it's like usually it's language. You're like, at the essence of it, what's the human need, right? The six human needs that Tony Robbins talks about. Is it like love, connection, contribution, variety, uh, uh, significance, or certainty. Those are the six, right?
Mhm.
And so if we can distill down, we go, "No, actually, we're having the same human needs that we're sharing together." It kind of helps people kind of connect the dots a little bit. Like, oh yeah, we just use different words.
Yeah.
Isn't that usually the truth? Like, people use different words with different meaning, but and the essence of it, you're like, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, totally. And we get that a lot because people are like, but joy and happiness are different. And I'm like, yeah, they can be, but what is your definition of joy? And so they state theirs, and I'm like, well, this is my definition. And like, oh, they're more alike than we thought. So I think that's the
Mhm.
biggest thing, is to be vocal about articulating the definition. Like this, when we first talked about sustainability, what does that really mean? And it wasn't until people started articulating, oh, this is how we define it. Same thing with D&I. What does that actually mean? um, because then it gets beyond the PR releases. It gets beyond like just nice, like marketing spiel. It goes into the root of like, hey, this is what we mean, and this is how we're going to do it.
I think that's a really articulate point. Like, the word sustainable, when you're actually in the pursuit of that as being sort of the center point of not just happiness and it's sustainable happiness within the business,
Mm,
that creates sustainable growth for your business, I think makes a ton of sense, because you ask different questions when you're willing to be sustainable.
yeah.
Patagonia made some decisions that would financially cost them money and it could have negatively hurt their bottom line, but it was leaning in to the feeling that the employees were going, this company is committed to this, and
Yeah,
that just even deepened the resolve of people to be committed to the same direction, I believe,
totally.
anyways.
And that's a great example.
You know,
You stated earlier that some people, some leaders wait until they're successful and super profitable before they focus on making them other employees happy. Patagonia is another great example of one that didn't. They were investing in on-site daycare, letting their employees go off and do their surf thing. Like, you would love it there, like surf for weeks on end.
well, it's funny because I actually interviewed Sean Thompson.
Oh no,
He's a world champion surfer,
yeah.
and he was actually one of the original employees at Patagonia.
Uh,
He went on to create his own brand, Instinct, and we do a deep dive actually on his whole experience there and some of his discussion points. He's got a thing called The Code.
uh,
I listened to my podcast.
cool.
You'd love it. He's a super cool guy,
That
but
is,
he talks a lot about the early days, about the decisions they made.
mm,
It was not popular, for people that weren't bought into what this direction was.
yeah, yeah. Same thing that happened with Zappos, and I think same thing that's happening with those that really want to take a stand on it. I think a big part of
Is there a moment of truth for a company when you're kind of faced with this? Like this is the moment of truth. Are we going to really live this? Are we going to play it through?
for sure.
Is there like a moment you think in companies where it's like, now is the time to like stand for it?
I think, I mean, there's no doubt for sure. Like for startups,
Yeah.
for smaller companies, I think it's around the 75 to 125 employee mark where, like, this is either going to go amazingly well or this is going to like take a nosedive very quick.
So why at that point? Why at that number? What do you think? Is it sort of like it's too many people to be in one room at the same time for like a team meeting, and it now has to actually sustain beyond a team meeting?
Yeah, I think that's where I feel like it's more of a systems break, like
Right.
if you're not building the scaffold or the rigor for the system, then it's not going to hold.
Totally. Oh my gosh, I love the way you think, because I'm like, I look at it like, okay, I used to live in Maui when I was like, I left high school and moved to Hawaii, and I had this Maui cruiser. It was like really crummy, and if I drove exactly 50 and under, it was fine. But if I went a couple miles over, things would start shaking and noise would make. And actually, I think I went to the Kaanapali Highway and it broke down. And it's sort of like business. The systems, you don't really notice it that you need the systems when you're small, but these happiness systems, that's where it'll make or break. Or I believe what you're saying is like, that's where you kind of like, that's the point where you kind of, if you didn't invest in the systems before, now it's going to show up probably, right?
Yeah, I'm still hung up on the fact that you lived in Maui. I'm like, that's cool.
And I'm Canadian. I was working on the table too. So
I know you're into.
I did that when I was like in my early 20s. Everybody went to university and I just went, I'm going to go pursue my dream of becoming a professional windsurfer. And of course I didn't even sim. I basically just surfed, windsurfed. But it was fun. It was great. It was a great experience.
Oh yeah, totally. That's super cool.
So what's next for you? Let's talk a little bit about this as we're kind of wrapping up here a little bit. What is next for you in terms of you're consulting? Are you speaking?
Mm.
What is there new sort of projects you're working on, or is there more happiness squared? Like, are you kind of like adding more to this?
Yeah, well, just a quick clarification. Earlier in the conversation, I didn't even have time. We've been talking about so many cool things. Quick clarification. So Tony and I worked on Delivering Happiness, the book, and then now running the company since 2010. And so my book Beyond Happiness came out in 2021, right? Yeah, I'm getting dates mixed up. So that's kind of my latest, so to speak, chapter, because and people are like, wait, why is it beyond? Isn't that what it's about? Is it happiness? And I was like, well, you know what? It's true. I still believe in all these happiness, levers and how we could sustain it and how it's so important to find that meaning. In a crazy, still very chaotic world. So the beyond for me is to expand that conversation so that perception is not about just the highs, just the rainbows and unicorns, just, when you sell the company. It's actually about the lows too. And
About what?
the lows. So not just the highs, but the lows.
Oh, I see. I see. You said the loathe, and I'm like,
The lows.
no loathe. Like I'm loathing this.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So the lows. So it's both. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like really what we're talking about what's beyond happiness is like the highs and lows, and being able to live, understand, and embrace it all, so that there's more sense of fulfillment. Because especially what we've experienced in the last few years, the world got 2020. We never were able to say that's ever happened in our lifetime. So what do we make of it? That's where I'm at now. It's just like, look, a lot of people are still hurting. A lot of people are in a huge growth mode, which is awesome. But we also have to recognize there was a lot of stuff that was endured in the last few months, or sorry, few years. And so
Mhm.
to take that into a more broader, bigger spectrum of the highs and those depths of the lows that we got into, and then actually being able to say, look, I'm okay with my shadows and my blind spots as a leader, as a parent, as a human being. I will bring that to the table because I know it'll make me that much more resilient and strong for whatever lies ahead, and a better person. So that's kind of where I'm going with this beyond happiness stuff. Is the point is, don't wake up and go to sleep be happy the whole time, because it's not realistic. The point is, at least we know all the moments in between can be lived meaningfully, you know, authentically. And that's where I'm kind of expanding the conversation to.
I love that. It's like almost a reflection too. If you think about what you're saying at the end is really about fulfillment. And so fulfillment, if I'm like I work like crazy right now, and it's not just because I'm busy, it's because I'm on a mission. I believe that this work is really important to help people build a groundswell to make an impact for good, right? So
Mhm.
to me, I kind of like I'm fulfilled. And you're right, there's been some lows, but I'm like happily kind of plowing through it a little bit because I know it's worth it. It's like when someone's on a mission,
Mhm.
they sure it can be tough a lot of times when you're doing it, but there's something about there's a certain level of happiness even when it's like not so happy. Does that make sense?
Totally.
That is does make sense because that's what you're saying, and I think that when we reflect, that might give you another sense of happiness, is knowing that the outcome for you is to look back and go, my life had meaning. I didn't just work hard and miss my family. In those times I was working hard, I actually was contributing to my family legacy, or my reputation, or whatever. Right? I think is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's like not thinking about your legacy after you're gone. It's actually living your legacy now, because you're doing everything that you feel is right and meaningful for the world and the people you love. The other part that I really appreciate what you're doing is that, yeah, you're super crazy busy right now. But before we got on this podcast, you talked about how you were nurturing your greenhouse too as you grow others. That's the metaphor I used in the book. But basically, you're making sure to make time for yourself as you're doing all these, important, really cool, meaningful things with a higher purpose. So I think that's another thing that we all should remember. Don't forget to tend to our greenhouse too.
I need to go with a machete
Yeah.
because I have not been tending it that well. Yes, I did go backcountry snowboarding, but that's probably the first thing I've done in a long time. My wife is just like, she praised me. She's like, "Oh my God, please do this more," because she knows I work so hard. So I'm not living that. I'm not living the truth of what you described in that managing your greenhouse as well as I should. And thank you for your comments because I think I need to lean into that more to be more sustainable for sure.
Well, it's an everyday practice, so don't be too hard on yourself. And maybe you should start with the machete with that plant that seems to be growing by the minute behind
Oh yeah, that thing's huge.
you.
Well, it's actually that plant was twice the size. We had to cut it, and we've actually got
Oh my
another
gosh.
room. I have plants all around me. It's like a jungle in here. I live in Canada, so I like to feel like I'm somewhere in the tropics.
Oh, nice.
It's the feeling I want. So thank you so much for being on the show. This has
Yeah.
been incredible. I've been so looking forward to this. Your work's amazing. Your presentation was off the chain, and I think you've inspired a lot of people. In fact, I'd say the gentleman I'm working with, he's actually a lion, and he may very well have actually seen your talk as well. I'm pretty sure he did. And so I'm going to actually mention him to connect with you. Maybe after the show we can chat about it.
Yeah.
But I just want to thank you again for what you do. Where can people follow you and connect with you after this podcast?
Yeah, so there's Jenn Lim, so JENNLIM.com, and then deliveringhappiness.com. One of them's like more around the book, if you're curious about that. And Delivering Happiness is the company of how we're helping other orgs, and a bunch of free resources and things you can download and start testing this out for yourself, because everyone is really in a test mode. So good luck with your book, dude. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you for writing a little review for me. That was very meaningful to me. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Deserved.
All right. Until next time, thank you everyone for listening. This is an episode of the Groundswell Origins podcast. If you have a question or thought or ideas, just go to groundswell.fm. There's a button there you can actually leave me a voicemail and let me know what you think, what you like, and what you'd like to hear more of. And until next time, mahalo.